This content is being brought to you by the Bourbon Real Talk American Whiskey Aroma Kit. This is a tool that I put together to help all you whiskey aficionados out there develop your palates. You can sit down with the vials and train your senses, or you can sit down with a great dram and break that whiskey down to its components. If you have any interest of purchasing a kit of your own, head on over to bourbonrealtalk.com/shop and pick one up. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in to the biggest name in whiskey and coffee that you never heard, Carlos de Aldecoa. This is part 2 of this recording. If you haven't already done so, go back to our episode list and listen to part 1. You won't regret it. His story is amazing. And while you're there, please subscribe, like, and review.
You know, it's a great point to discuss, right? I believe like you that through the government interaction in labor relations and workplace conditions, the need for a union has really changed, right? Where ultimately, whether it was workplace safety, whether it was overtime pay, whether it was any type of workplace-related regs that did not exist in the early 1900s or 20s or 30s, significantly has changed, and even more in the way that companies today are even swinging the pendulum in a totally different direction in social responsibility and taking care of their employees.
Right.
If you look at the Google workplace today, right, that they got foosball tables, they got free food, they've
got napping stations.
Exactly. So I think so when you look at what companies are doing today to retain, attract talent, it really is a big hindrance to unions to try to unionize those workplaces. And I think my experience was very specific in the case of a union, right? We bought an asset in a plant, an operating business from Kraft. So we bought a 1 million square foot plant manufacturing millions of cases of between Minute Rice and Kool-Aid and Crystal Light and Tang that had been a General Foods legacy plant that became a Kraft Foods. We bought it in 2006, and as part of that legacy plant, it had a union. So part of the reason why Kraft sold us that plant as an asset is not because the plant was making all this money and they want to sell the crown jewels, right? They sold it because they were looking at potentially shutting down the plant, in part because of the business change and also in part because of the labor costs and labor conditions in the facility.
Right.
So we had to be very strong negotiating favorable workplace conditions and cost to make us competitive with non-union plants, which were winning the coffee market. Mm-hmm. So it did become where in the past large companies like Kraft or Nestle's or Sara Lee or some of the large national companies, because they own so many brands, they do not want to be in the media portrayed as a union, a company that goes on strikes because they have union conditions or union issues they're negotiating, because it becomes very personal against the brand. It creates a lot of liability. In our case, we were looking at the survival of that plant. We were looking at what do we do to keep this as a viable facility. And one of the things is for us to be competitive in bidding national business for other brands, we had to really change our cost structure. Mm-hmm. And the pension reform and the defined benefit plan and there were so many elements that were significantly expensive in that plant related to legacy that made us not competitive. Mm-hmm. So it unfortunately took some very serious actions for people, the union and the employees to realize that the survival of the plant had to do in a big part with the right labor law or labor conditions in our CBA and cost to compete with non-union plants, or just not even non-union plants, just can compete with any other plant.
Right.
Because we were paying, from overtime rules. Overtime was not overtime is 40 in a week. Overtime at that plant was anything over 8 hours a day. Right, so you lose a lot of flexibility for efficiencies in the plant, right?
Right.
The seniority rules, all these different elements that are great, they protect the employee, and we valued that, created elements of, that made us very uncompetitive to pursue a lot of business and grow that company.
So what happens if you're not able to get rules in place that allow you to be competitive to all of those employees' jobs?
Well, unfortunately, what happened? That ultimately we went through 2 labor strikes and the plant is shut down today.
Right.
So we just could not compete on a global scale. And believe me, we've known each other a couple times, and I'm pretty intense, and I play to win, not play to play. And we wanted this plant to be absolutely successful, and we just could not compete in big part because the business changed, and also because of the conditions on the union that made it a very expensive plant to operate.
Sure. Well, and that's the point that I wanted to make, is that I'm a big advocate for business, mm-hmm. because, as a small business owner, I've had people that have come to me and have accused me of being greedy or not wanting to give enough, or whatever the case may be. But real business owners think of longevity, right? And what they want is a profitable business situation that's sustainable.
Correct.
And so I just, if anybody Googles you after this interview, if you see that stuff, I just don't want you to get the wrong impression and think, he's this business tycoon that was being greedy. I'm sure you would have loved to have kept that plant open profitably,
right,
and employed all of those people. But it just wasn't possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately, right? I mean, I think our goal has always been to grow, and what we're doing today here and what we're doing every day is not for me, it's for the employees, it's for the kids, my kids, it's my nephews, it's the next generation. So
Sure.
I think anything we do, we don't buy and sell businesses. We're building legacy here with anything we try to do.
Sure. So along those lines, do you feel like the press has been fair to you in their reporting of you and what you've brought?
I think everybody has their opinions, and I think the press has a certain ability to want to get people to click on that link. So, I feel strongly about my beliefs, and I stand behind everything we've done, and the intentions and what we wanted to do. And even if I still talk to a lot of the ex-union employees that worked at the plant, I'm friends with them. We've actually hired many of them in our current operations. So I think actions speak louder than words, and I think my reputation dealing with unions and dealing with the customer and taking care of the customer and the employee are very clear.
Yeah, speaks for itself. Well, let's transition a little bit because that's a little bit dark, but I felt like we needed to address it in case people were looking things up. And so you are by education an engineer. Is that?
That is correct.
And what type of engineering degree?
I did industrial and chemical engineering.
And so when I met you, you are the only person, being in real estate, that has ever said to me, I love industrial real estate. Why? Why chemical engineering? Why industrial?
I love converting, I love making, I love building. So, I mean, I think maybe I didn't have many toys when I was little, but so I love getting my hands dirty. I love building a team. I love creating a process. I love the problem solving, right? I love to figure out how to retool this piece of equipment to do something else. And I think that's what attracted David Pickerel and I to work together, because instead of buying a Vendome brand new still or a Holstein still that was brand new, I mean, my approach was very unconventional on the equipment, the process, the asset to create an amazing product. And I think his chemie background and my chemie background, we were just, like you see the noodling on the wall, just kind of, geeks on how to make an amazing product with the assets that we had. So industrial real estate has always been fascinating just because of the history that some of them have, right? So it's a neat part of history and manufacturing.
Right. So if you are going to start a spirits production company, you have to deal with the 3/4 tier system. So for those of you who have not heard this before, you've got the producer, you have when you're talking about spirits, the wholesaler, the retailer, and in some states, the on-premise, which are bars and restaurants, can only buy through a retailer through a Class B license. So he could make the best product that's ever been made on planet Earth, that anyone who tasted it instantly makes them a genius, makes them heal from wounds, and it wouldn't matter unless he could get a wholesaler and a retailer
Right.
and an on-premise to sell the product for him, because he can't sell direct to the consumer, at least not enough to keep a business running.
Right.
And so what motivated you when you have this huge coffee operation to go into such a highly regulated industry as spirits?
I mean, the biggest thing that I can say is that, I guess we like challenges, right? And then at the same time, I think the regulation and the challenge of the supply chain adds margin to the product if you do it right. So, I mean, I think from my perspective, the ability historically to be able to work with we work with national retailers on the coffee side. So we had established relationship with retailers that we could kind of bridge from the coffee side into the liquor side. And even with national retailers, a lot of times you have to go on the coffee non-regulated three-tier system. You have to go through brokers and distributors, whether it's a Damon Group. So there's that whole idea, although it's difficult and it's a regulated in the liquor side, I think it helps kind of throttle, if you want to think about it a little bit, the ability to get into the market. It's hard, right? It's not a free market, and I totally understand it. But I think it's not every, and we see it on the coffee side, not everybody that has a coffee shop and a coffee brand and a little coffee roaster allows them to play in retail, right? Yet very many coffee roasters that are tiny might sell into 1 or 2 stores. But I think there's also the belief on the spirit side that because you have a spirit brand, that every retailer should pick it up and every distributor should pick it up. So I think the keeping the perspective of how big your market can and should be for your product and the cost competitiveness of the product is key. So one of the things that we did when we saw the barriers to entry in the three-tier system is what model of business should we have to be a different supplier and partner to the retailers and to the distributors? So how do we portray ourselves as a different partner? And for us, by not being a single branded company and being that we handle both from vodka to gin to bourbon to Canadian to Kentucky to Tennessee with significant scale. And the scale gives the retailer and the distributor the feeling that, hey, this guy, if I support his brand, he can take it from 10,000 cases to 200,000 cases without having to worry about raising partners' money, without having to worry about, going out to the street. So they're more committed to supporting, I think, those kind of credible partners while we're able to pass on a significant cost savings because of our scale. So it is a challenge. It is difficult. It limits some of the freedom that we would all want to have as distillers, that we could just go knock on the door and want to sell direct. But as long as everybody's playing by the same rules, it's fine.
So what I just heard you say is that the 3/4 tier system, because we have 4 tier here in Texas, is a impediment when you, especially, it's an impediment for everybody that wants to be a producer, but especially if you don't have scale. So you came with scale
Right.
to overcome those impediments. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if we came with a single brand and I wanted to just create an amazing bourbon brand and that's the only thing we did, I think it would limit our ability to convince a retailer and a distributor jointly that they should carry our product.
Right.
Everybody thinks their bourbon is the best and everybody thinks they have the magic juice, just like everybody thinks their coffee is the best. But many retailers, what I saw in the coffee experience is that many retailers or large global companies that want to partner up with you want to be sure that ultimately you have the cost efficiencies, right? That you're not making a new fill at $1,000, you can make a new fill at $400. So if you have that scalability, then they're going to look at you under a totally different light.
Sure.
And you don't have to, if you think about a distributor, he's distributing thousands of brands and getting their attention in your brand and trying to convince the retailer to pick up your product is difficult. I mean, it's very challenging.
Right. Well, and I've interviewed a lot of the craft producers across the state of Texas, and most of them struggle for profitability. And the startup cost of starting a spirits production company is astronomical. And then if you only want to sell aged spirits, it's even higher because you don't have immediate revenue. And so if you're not doing it with cash and you have debt service, like where's your revenue coming from to pay for that, and so on and so forth. And so one of the things that I've been excited about Gulf Coast is that Texas, and somebody said this to me, Texas has a brand internationally. Just the state of Texas.
Right.
Like you can go to Japan and say Texas, and that means something, right? Of course, bourbon has its brand, but Texas, the state, has its brand.
Right.
And that has some value internationally. But the companies that are starting up spirits production don't necessarily have the capacity to tap those markets or the resources to penetrate those markets. And they're not getting the support from the tier system to get access to those markets because the tier systems are busy selling the brands that are already making them money.
Right.
So what has me excited about your facility is that you are going to have a capacity
somebody who has a desire to become a Texas producer could buy contract distilled product from you or even non-distiller produced product from you and build their brand with a true Texas spirit.
Correct.
And then once they had proof of concept, they had built out their supply chain, they knew that they would have a place to sell their product when they make it, then buy the still, then build the building, then do all of those things. And there are other companies that's their business model. NGPI in Indiana, that's what they've done for years. They've started their own brands now, but that's what they've done for years. There's other companies that was their business model, but never really one in Texas until now. And so let's talk about that. How big is your production facility?
Yeah, and that's exactly the business model. So we have the branded model is one, we have a bottling operation, and then we have the processing, kind of B2B large scale manufacturing. So
let me pause right there.
Yeah.
So for a product to be considered a Texas product, it has to be grain to glass. Okay? The grain doesn't have to be grown here. But once you have the grain and the grain's been processed, at the point that you start working with that grain, that's where the Texas part starts. And then once it makes it all the way into the glass, then it is a Texas product. You actually cannot make a Texas product and bottle it outside of the state of Texas and it still be a Texas whiskey. And so you have also built a bottling facility so that smaller producers could bottle here. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Okay. Because when you are a small producer and you have to come up with a still and you have to come up with your packaging materials and an aging warehouse, and you have to have a hammer mill to make convert your grain into something that can be, put into your cooker and all that stuff. That's all very expensive. And so for you to provide that, you're not just building your brands.
Right.
You're building Texas whiskey.
And that's been the goal. I mean, the goal has been, how do we put Texas on the map in whiskey, right? And I think that has to be done with quality and also with ultimately scalability.
Yeah.
Right. So there's great whiskeys out there. I think what we bring to the table is we bring craft with scale. So the fact that we can produce today 400 barrels of whiskey a month, and we have an expansion project that can take us from 400 barrels to 7,000 barrels a month of whiskey, making us the largest distillery west of the Mississippi, that's going to put Texas on the map. Because to hit national level sales, to compete with Tennessee and Kentucky or global, you have to be price competitive. So we sold actually last year a container of bulk Texas bourbon, 6,000 gallons, to Belgium. Because the way they looked at it and said, and it's the first bulk container ever leaving the state of Texas. And the way they're looking at it is they see the brand behind Texas. They see the fact that it's not Kentucky, it's not Tennessee, it's Texas. And like you said, if you go to places all over the world and you say Texas, that name it's a brand, it is recognized. So I think we want to put Texas on the map on a global scale. We want to put it in as far as Texans should be drinking Texan products. But a lot of the Texan products today are expensive. And it's because of scale.
Right, sure.
So I think what we want to do is create a craft, affordable, Texas-made, 100% Texas product at a price that absolutely everybody in the state can afford.
So that's remarkable. So you could make up to 7,000 barrels a month here. You took me on a private tour the last time I was here. I took pictures of your fermenters. And I looked, and your fermenter capacity is about 2/3 of MGPI, which is one of the largest whiskey producers in the world. It's just, the scale is remarkable. We've never seen anything like it in the state of Texas. And how far away are you from being able to fire up that process?
We are probably weeks away. I mean, I think even if I take you back there, you'll see that we got it all piped in, all ready to go. So I think we are going to do a little bit of a twist for the next couple of weeks because of that Holstein still that we bought, the German still. So we're going to be firing that up before we do the big fermenters. But we're actually running those big 40,000 gallon fermenters in the next couple of weeks to make rum. So we're buying. There's a large. The last standing and operating refinery for sugar in the state of Texas is in South Texas. So we're contracting with them to buy 100% Texas molasses that we will be bringing tankers, 6,000 gallons, and dropping them into our fermenters to make a 100% Texas rum that is from Texas sugar, Texas crystallized, Texas processed, Texas molasses, and distilled in the state of Texas, again, to compete at a national level.
Sure.
Because there's other great rums out there, but if we're going to compete with the national brands, be it Bacardi or whomever it is, you need the scale that you can do 500,000 gallons of fermentation in buying tanker loads of molasses to convert it into a cost-effective rum to compete in that market.
Are you going to age those in your whiskey barrels?
We're going to do combination. So some is going to be in whiskey, some is going to be, we got some different European barrels coming in that we're going to do some finishing on those.
Wow. Yeah, so the rules for rum are a little bit different. It's got to be molasses or sugar.
Or sugar,
right? But they can be aged in, different.
Or unaged.
Or unaged. They can be unaged. They can be in, I think it can be in new fill, right? But most of the time they're in used casks.
They are, yeah.
And those used
casks. You have
casks.
to distill them above a certain proof.
Right. And so, that's remarkable to have 100% Texas rum at scale.
Correct.
I mean, you're changing the game. I mean, there is a change that is going to come. I love all the Texas producers. I've tried many of their products. No, they don't taste like Kentucky. No, they're not supposed to.
Right,
That's totally okay. Texas has its own thing going on, and people are still figuring things out here. But there's not a scenario where in the future Texas doesn't have its place on the main stage for whiskey internationally in the future because of the movement and what's going on here. And I just really feel like you're playing a big part in making that happen. And I don't know that enough people know what's going on down here at Gulf Coast, I mean, I saw a podcast and I watched it and I was like, they said something about production capacity. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? Right. And when I came down here and I saw the operation, it just blew me away. Yeah. So definitely really remarkable. So you have built, all of this in the coffee world. You're building all of this in the spirits world, but you also do some philanthropy. I read that you were on was it Boys and Girls County?
Country.
Country.
Boys and Girls Country. Yeah.
Country. So what all are you supporting philanthropically?
Yeah, so Boys and Girls Country is a great organization. So it's an orphanage for kids. It's a private orphanage. So ultimately it's 100% private funded, no government funding. So there's still a level of hope for the parents to, they do turn in their kids into this orphanage. And there's a hope that they're going to continue to be committed in the education of their kids. They still have visitation of their kids. And there's still that kind of light at the end of the tunnel where we want to rekindle the parents and the kids. So it's a really amazing organization that miracles happen every day at that place. So I got very connected with that organization. I'm at the Houston Zoo on the board.
Are you on the board at Boys and Girls Country?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm on the board there too, and I'm the board at the zoo. And then I've become, I got blessed in life that about 1.5 years ago, my youngest daughter has Down syndrome. And so we became really connected with the Global Down Syndrome Foundation in supporting the cause for awareness, for early intervention, and just helping kids and parents that ultimately go through that very shocking kind of first, your kid has Down syndrome, you don't know what to do.
Sure.
And create that network. It's been an amazing journey and blessing to be involved in that.
And from what I understand, on your coffee side of your business, you've done something to support the Down Syndrome Foundation, or?
We did, yeah. So we created a sub-brand with my daughter's name, with Nina, that all the sales of that product, 100% of those sales, go to the Global Down Syndrome Foundation, because again, we want to give back, we want to commit, and she goes to a special needs school where we also support that school financially. We support them ultimately as much as we can through different friends, and it's, we're blessed to have some resources, and we also want to be sure we give back. So I think the Global Down Syndrome Foundation does an amazing job of awareness and inclusion for kids with Down syndrome. So we want to be sure that very early on when that happened, I spoke to my family and said, I'm going to do this for the Nina brand, and everybody's absolutely committed on it. So it's exciting.
There's a box right over there. Can you grab it and show us the Nina brand? So this is one of your coffee companies.
And the brand, it's a pretty interesting branding that we did, where the brand, we called it, again, kids with Down syndrome have 3 chromosomes of the 21st chromosome, so 3 Cs. So we wanted to do is a 3C plus 3C. So it's a blend of 3 continents of coffee in the product to represent the 3 chromosomes in the coffee. So it's a neat product. We have it statewide now with H-E-B. We obviously have it with Amazon and a bunch of other online retailers.
Wow. And so it's not 100% of the profits.
Whatever
It's
we sell,
100% of the
sales.
sales.
Yeah. So
Go to this.
whatever we sell, that revenue goes 100% to the global Down syndrome.
That is remarkable and respectable. I appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
We're blessed.
So if anyone watching this podcast wanted to get more involved with what you're doing, website, social media, where should they go?
So we have the different websites for the different companies, whether it's Giant Whiskey, we have BJ Hooker's Vodka, we have Hickory Hill, we have Round Rock Vodka that we sell in 26 states. Obviously the Aldecoa brand of products at the Aldecoa website and Facebook and social media. So I think we can be found easily out there on the internet.
Awesome. Well, if you want more information about Bourbon Real Talk, you can get that at bourbonrealtalk.com. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook /Bourbon Real Talk, and you can search for us on your favorite podcast player. And if you woke up this morning and you were unsure whether or not anyone loved you, just know that I love you, and I'll see you next time on Bourbon Real Talk.